Hey, welcome back to the Small Business Mindset. Today, I thought I would bring a prop with me. And those of you that are listening to me at home or in the car or whatever, I'm actually holding up a penny, a 1 cent coin. Now, these actually ceased production in 2025, but the penny has a really interesting history to it. And I think you'll all identify it as it comes to being in business. And here's why. So, the penny was actually created back in 1793, so over 200 years ago. And it was originally constructed of copper. And so those of you that are in the plumbing industry know how valuable copper is. So if you can imagine, you have some pennies back in the late 1700s, hang on to them. They're worth something. But over time, the penny took on some lot of different forms. In the 1940s, during World War II, the government needed copper, and so they changed the composition of the penny to be zinc over steel. And like I said, in 2025, they discontinued production. Now, why is that? Well, because realistically, now it costs over 3 cents to make a 1 cent coin. And you might think, okay, well, yeah, but it's a penny. I mean, it's something we use, right? Is it worth the extra cost for something to make something that isn't even worth its value? And that's the lesson I want to talk about today. So back in the late 1700s, I'm sure you could buy all kinds of things with a penny. And you thought, why did the US Mint decide to create coins instead of paper money? Because paper money's been around a lot longer, at least in the United States. So coins were a way to create lower denominations of currency. So when you go to buy something and all you had was a dollar bill and they had to give you change back, how would they do that? Would they start tearing the bill in half? Well, that doesn't make any sense. So they created these smaller denomination coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, dollars, things like that. They were smaller and easier to carry, whether in a coin purse or a pouch. They were a little more weather resistant. So unlike a paper dollar or a paper currency, if you got them wet, you could just dry them off. They wouldn't be ruined necessarily. So a lot of benefits to having the penny. And I remember in my youth, I could actually buy things for a penny. For those of you that have visited a grocery store or something like that and see those gumball machines or candy machines where you put in a coin and you turn the little crank and then the candy comes out, believe it or not, once upon a time, you could actually buy a piece of candy for a penny. Not that way anymore. So I understand why they discontinued the penny. But more importantly, I want to talk about how this relates to all of you and your business. So many times I see business owners, they have revenues coming in. Sales look great. Their quarters look great. The products or services, they're flying off the shelves. They're getting new subscribers. Yay, right? You think their balance sheet looks really good. But then reality sinks in, just like the penny. Once they start looking at what their actual profits are, they didn't actually make anything. Because what happens a lot of times is what I see, the sales look great, but the cost of services or the cost of goods it took to get you to those sales is out of kilter, meaning it costs you more to produce the product than actually sell the product and make a profit off of it. And you're like, who would do that? Believe it or not, more people than not do that. Now, if you're somebody that sells a product, you sell a coin, you sell a loaf of bread, you sell a pair of shoes, whatever it is you sell. There are multiple areas where you can spend money producing that product. There can be supply costs. What does it take to have your inventory, your wholesale goods, where you either put the product together or you repackage it or remarket it as your own? Is it a production line, that you need to produce your product? I heard an interview recently with the former president of Tesla. And this interview, I think, was very interesting to me. I hadn't thought about it in this way, and I'm not an engineer and I'm not a car maker, never have worked in an industry. But here's one thing that struck me as interesting. As the company was evolving and trying to get into the electric car space and compete against a lot of the big car, owners, GM, Ford, things like that, they had to be competitive in their market. And you thought, okay, well, they're producing an electric car. Isn't that competitive enough? Yeah. I mean, it was new and innovative. It was also very expensive. And so really only the elite or the more well-off could afford their car. And I think they realized in order to have longer standing success, they needed to produce a vehicle that anyone could buy. A more moderate or a middle class American could buy, or internationally. How did they do that? And it wasn't such as like, well, we'll just decrease our profits. It wasn't about that. The bulk of the costs came in the actual physicality of the car, the components of the car. Now, traditionally, in car manufacturing, you would have an assembly line. You would have robots kind of on the first half, putting all the components of the frame together, a lot of welding, a lot of different pieces they're putting together. And the second half of the assembly line would be people that were actually installing the different components, the stereo systems, the seats, the upholstery, the lights, all that kind of stuff. And so then the car would come off the line. What they realized is that they're thinking, how can we cut our production costs? And like, well, we can't cut more people. I mean, because we still need to produce the amount of cars, right? So in order to speed up production, we have to condense something. We have to figure out how to do it faster. So one of the engineers with Tesla went home one day and he had an idea. And he actually came back to the table the next day with one of those Matchbox cars. We think of like Hot Wheels cars, the little bitty ones that you kind of race around. Well, the interesting about that is the fact that those little Hot Wheels cars or those die-cast cars are die-cast, and I just said it. They're not put together in individual pieces, they're molded. So they take molten aluminum, melted down, pour it into a mold, and then they form it that way, versus having sometimes hundreds of different parts that need to be welded together, and that takes time, right? Even though they're melded together by a robot, maybe not a person, but that takes time, and time is money. So the question was, okay, if we choose to cast our car frames out of aluminum, can it withhold the pressure that it would take for the car to perform? Meaning, can it hold, the person, the tires, the engine, all those different components? Is it solid enough to do that? And at the time, the answer was no. But the question remained, is it even possible? So the president and his team at Tesla went out back and took some old metal scraps, some aluminum scraps, and melted them down. And over the months and years it took them to put this together, melted it down, made a cast, melted it down, made another cast, tested it over and over again until they figured out how to die cast an aluminum frame for a Tesla car that was solid and secure enough that allowed them to speed up the production, thus decreasing their costs. Isn't that interesting? One of the lessons I know I've learned as a business owner, and that I'm sure you've heard a lot throughout your career, is if it's the way it's always done, then why change it? That's just the way it's done. I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot with processes and procedures. I hear that a lot with how you do certain things in business, how you apply for a loan, how you get things started, what kind of capital you need. I think it's very comforting for a lot of us to say, well, this is the step 1, step 2, step 3. If I don't do them in order, I'm not going to be successful. I can't deviate from the norm. I love innovators like my story at Tesla that question the norm because they had a directive. They're like, we have to cut costs. How do we do that? We're not going to diminish the quality of the product we're putting out, but there's got to be another way to do this. And it was very innovative for the car industry because if you think about it, that is a big chunk of time and a big expense to the product they're putting out. The other thing I see too, other than questioning if it's the way it's always done, why can't we do it differently? For one thing, it's scary. And I think if you're a business owner, you have to have a certain amount of chops about you. You have to have certain qualities that you're willing to forge ahead and step out and get really comfortable with. And what are those qualities? Well, one, you have to have a skill where you like to be able to figure things out and you have a tenacity for this. Now, I know that's something I've always prided myself in. Now, I don't always know all the answers, and sometimes I don't even know where I get the answers, but I'm all really, really good at asking questions and being curious. Take this podcast, for example. It took me over a year to get this podcast into production. Now, this was almost 7 years ago when I first started, so podcasts have come a long way since then, and it's a lot easier to record and get it up and running a lot faster. But at the time, I didn't know anybody that had a podcast. I'll take that back. I knew one person that had tried it. So I said, well, how did you do this? And when I asked my friend this question, she's like, well, here's how I did it, but it was kind of clunky and it wasn't great. And I said, well, would you be willing to explore this with me? And she said, yeah. So we did. And we kept asking questions. Now, I could have dropped thousands of dollars into hiring somebody to produce this podcast for me. And I did spend a little money. But what I realized is like, okay, what is my goal in creating this podcast? It was more about education and knowledge and connection. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to monetize it just yet. I have since, thankfully. But that was never my goal. My goal was never to create a large income from this podcast platform. It was more about I need to get a message out in a clean and concise way, in a way that looks polished and professional, and a way that's easy to produce and not very cumbersome. I also didn't want to continue to drop a lot of money into it as time went on. So that's another skill I had to learn. I'm like, okay, how do I create the platform for this that allows me then to jump in and take ownership over it and be the producer by myself? So that's another skill I want to encourage you to understand as a business owner is that one, you have to have the skills to figure it out, ask a lot of questions, navigate the path, keep going, keep trying, because realistically, you're going to try and fail a lot. And the faster you fail, the faster you can get to success. So your ability and your willingness to figure it out is pretty powerful as a business owner. You also have to get really comfortable with risk. So taking risks can be putting up every penny you own, no pun intended, putting up every penny you own to go after the business and realizing that, hey, it's up to me. If I'm going to make this work, I'm going to work my tail off and it's sink or swim. I know when I switched industries a long time ago and started my own business, I had a friend said to me, and because I was weighing all the risks, and he goes, well, look at it this way, Kirsten. He's like, worst case scenario, it fails and you go get a job. I'm like, okay, I hadn't thought about it in that way. But really, yeah, I have a lot of skills. I've had jobs before. I could probably have somebody hire me again if my business fails. Now, I didn't want that to happen, and thankfully it hasn't, and it's been thriving. But that was always like, okay, worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario for you? If you're comfortable with the risk you're taking, but you have to be willing to step out and take the risk. Now, it might not be monetary. You might have to spend a dime to take a risk. It might be changing paths. It might be going from one, industry to another and having people understand you in it. I went from banking into commercial real estate. And even though those are very complementary industries, I had to get people starting to think of me in the real estate world and not in the banking world anymore. I think it's very easy, especially when we've been in an industry and been successful in an industry. They put our name and our face with that industry, and it's hard for them to change their minds. And that was probably my biggest risk. Like, I need to get people to think of me in that world. How can I do that? Well, I need to provide value in some way that was different and maybe not the way it was always done, right? So buck the norm. I'm also a firm believer in I never like to break the rules because there are rules in every industry that are legally binding and you have to be in compliance with those things. But I like to stretch them a little bit. I like to ask questions and, see what the possibilities are, because the success I think I've had with clients is thinking outside of the box, thinking, how can we get this deal across the finish line in a way that might look impossible from the start? Now, we know we have to abide by certain rules and regulations, but how can we work within those to get really, really creative? I'm going to go back to my podcast for a second. As we talk about why is it important for you as a business owner to understand all those risks, to understand all those metrics, we also wear a lot of hats. What I don't like to see when I talk to business owners is the fact that sometimes I wear a lot of hats, but I don't want to do this. I don't like doing this. I don't like doing the money. I don't like doing the accounting. I like being out in front of the customer, or I just like being the visionary and I want someone else to implement everything. Here's a hard reality. You have to be able to, at any given time, jump in and wear the hat. Can you do that? If you're a small business owner, that is paramount because industries change, economies change, things change. What if you lose a staff member? Are you dead in the water until you hire somebody else? Hopefully not. Hopefully you've developed some standard operating procedures where you can go pull it out and be like, okay, I can jump right in and I can handle this. Or you can slide somebody else into that role, on an interim basis and they can handle it. But you will have the power to navigate all that. What I hate to see is that an owner established a business, or maybe they just own a business, and something happens and it's teetering. And you're like, I don't know what to do. And the business goes away. It fails. And even if it wasn't a financial hit on you, a lot of times it is, it's still disappointing me. Like, okay, how could I have put my skills and expertise in it and jumped in and steer the ship right? The other thing I think as a business owner and an entrepreneur, you instead and it's, besides wearing all the hats, the marketing hat, the accounting hat, the sales hat, things like that, you need to have two very different but very important skills. You need to be both a strategic thinker and you need to be able to execute on that. And those are different skills. I know sometimes I struggle with that. I love being the strategic thinker, but I'm also very good at the execution. And me being a type A personality, but more importantly, I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm an achiever. I love crossing things off my list and feeling like, okay, I'm taking those steps, I'm moving it forward and things like that. And it feels really, really good to get those things executed and done. But at the same time, as the owner of the company, I need to step back and look at the bigger picture. So I am constantly evaluating our costs, in relation to our revenues. I look at our processes and procedures. I look at things that, how are we communicating with clients? What new business could we go after? And how are we doing it differently? What are we setting ourselves apart with? So I'm going to go back to this penny example for a minute. All right. So the U.S. Mint, I think they cited a number of years ago, well before last year when they discontinued production of the penny, they knew this penny was costing them over 3 times more to produce it than what it's worth. So why didn't they pull the plug then? I see this a lot with a lot of business owners. They know that a staple item that's in their inventory, whether it's a service offering or a product, they're like, it's not making us money, but it's who we are. It's our identity. It's our core product. How do we move away from that? I'm not saying you have to move away from it 100%, but you could do a shift and a pivot and an evolution into something new and better. I got to think about what that is. So how you do this, you need to ask your client base what their needs are. I guarantee you their needs have changed since you started in business, just like the penny. Who would have thunk in 2026 that most people don't carry cash around anymore? And a lot of people don't write checks anymore. They do everything, honestly, on their phone. Who would have thought even 10 years ago that the way you handle money and the way you pay for things is all electronic? That you don't carry currency anymore. I'm sure that's mind-boggling to you. But a lot of times we get so stuck in this, the way it's always been done. It's the past. What if we discontinue it? What does that mean? How do we handle this? I want you to focus more on what are the possibilities if we discontinue this for the future that could make it more efficient, that make it easier to navigate, that make it easier to make sales and don't cost you as much. Some of the costs that I think business owners forget that are in there are things like subscriptions to software products, other support services that help their business, or do they help your business? Marketing. You can spend a ton on advertising and, you have to weigh, is it truly beneficial for you? I challenge you this year. I know we're starting second quarter. If you haven't already, I want you to go back through all of your sales for last year. And I want you to document, where do those sales come from? Are they repeat customers? Are they new customers? Are they referral customers? Where did they come from? And why? And is there a potential to grow that market base? What products or services specifically are they buying from you? And why? Would they pay more for it? If you have a product or service that's flying off the shelves, you're like, this is our best selling product, but you're not making as much as you would like on it. Is it time to increase your pricing? Is it time to structure more of a package perspective? There are lots of ways that you can restructure your business offerings that can make you a higher profit. Notice I didn't say revenue, profit. At the end of the day, it's less cost to produce it, but higher revenues to sell it. So I hope today you learned a few skills, a little history lesson about the penny, but more importantly, some skills you can take back with you as you grow your business.